This video is sponsored by Rogue Trader and Owlcat Games. I can distinctly remember being around 12 years old, hanging out with my buddies in the back of an old comic book shop called Emerald City. We would hang out here once a week to play a game called Mech Warrior, which was my first introduction to tabletop gaming. The older kids that hung out here, though, were playing something different. A strange, intense-looking game with these elaborate, over-the-top miniatures. I was curious, so I asked them what this game was all about. And the guy didn't even look at me, he was completely engrossed in taking his turn. But he did kinda shuffle around and then pass me the 3rd edition Chaos Space Marine Codex that he had. Now mind you, I had never heard of Warhammer 40k before this moment. I didn't know what I was about to get into. And, as I think it bears repeating, I was 12. I took the book aside and cracked it open, and the very first thing I saw on the front page was this spooky evil skull with the phrase "Death to the False Emperor" scrawled at the bottom. My interest had officially been piqued. On the next page, the first line was, and I quote, "There is no peace amongst the stars, only carnage and slaughter and the laughter of thirsting gods." I could immediately tell I was reading something good, and the deeper I pried into this book, the more I could feel 40k digging its hooks in me. It was dark and edgy, and genuinely felt like I was reading something that I wasn't supposed to be. And as all 12-year-old boys know, that meant this thing was my entire life now. I became obsessed. Now mind you, I didn't have a lot of money for books, but every single time I went to the store, I would ask one of the older kids to borrow a different codex to read. Eventually, I convinced my friends that we absolutely had to start playing this game. So me and my buddy Ryan pooled what little bit of money we had together and split the battle from a crag box, and the rest is history. For years after that moment, I dreamed about how amazing it would be to have a video game that let me actually explore this grimdark universe I had become obsessed with. What would it be like to command one of those giant floating cathedral void ships and fly around the galaxy, fighting Xenos pirates and Chaos Space Marines? What would it be like to delve into some Necron ruins or visit the dark city of Komorra to deliver the Emperor's justice to all of his enemies? Now sure, we would eventually get games like Dawn of War or that one Tau Fire Warrior first-person shooter that we all remember liking, but I think we all just kind of forgot how bad it actually was. Now those games were all well and good, don't get me wrong, but they never really scratched that particular itch I had for exploration. And that itch would go unscratched until December of 2023, when Owlcat released their massive sprawling Warhammer RPG epic, Rogue Trader. Finally, I had a game that let me set out into the stars and explore the 40k universe the way the God Emperor intended. And boy howdy, did it deliver on that in spades, but it also gave me a deep and complex RPG system and the most comprehensive look at 40k that I think we've ever gotten. I absolutely loved this game, and though I was really happy to see it had overwhelmingly positive reviews online, after talking to a bunch of my 40k buddies at my news store, I was kinda disappointed to find out that a large portion of the community ended up sleeping on this one. Which honestly is a damn shame, because I think Rogue Trader managed to capture lightning in a bottle. It did something that no other 40k game that had come before it had ever managed to pull off. And to me and many others, it holds a special place in our heart. So whether you've never played Rogue Trader or you're like me and have a deep love and appreciation for this game, I want to explore why its fans put it on such a high pedestal. I want to talk about what it gets right about the 40k universe that so many other games struggle to understand. But before we get into the real meat and potatoes of this video, a quick thank you to Owlcat Games for sponsoring this video. If you're a fan of Warhammer 40,000 or unapologetically deep RPGs with hundreds of impactful decisions to make and limitless avenues for customization, then you owe it to yourself to download and play Rogue Trader. With Update 1.5 now live, there's never been a better time to jump in, as the game's in its best possible state. Now personally, I've been doing another playthrough recently, and yes, before you ask, I was in fact abusing the Death World Pyromancer Blade Dancer Executioner build. And yes, the rework to Death from Above, it was probably warranted, as now there's actually an element of risk-reward to the playstyle, rather than just one-shotting everything on screen. This patch was enormous and added hundreds of quality of life and balance improvements to the game, as well as reworked many of the origins, added new weapons, armor, and tons of new stuff to explore. Rogue Trader has already received 2 separate expansion packs, Void Shadows and Lex Imperialis, which focused on the Death Cults and the Adeptus Arbites. Both of these packs added dozens of hours of additional content to the game, including new classes, characters, and even pets. But apparently, we're going to be getting another 2 expansions next year, because I guess Owlcat decided this game wasn't enormous enough as it is. One of those expansions, by the way, and I kid you not, is based on my favorite creepy unsolved mystery from 40k, the Processional of the Damned. To all of you who watched my video on this about a year or so ago, you know how unbelievably excited I am for that one. Anyways, use my link down in the description or the pinned comment to download Rogue Trader for yourself today, and make sure you let them know that I sent you. And with that out of the way, let's dive headfirst into the grimdark. For decades, the Warhammer 40,000 franchise has inspired an endless stream of adaptations, from first-person shooters and real-time strategy games to card battlers and 100 different flavors of tactics games. Yet, despite how beloved most of these titles are, few have truly managed to capture the full scope and identity of the 41st millennium. Most titles, by necessity or design, confine themselves to a very narrow slice of the universe, whether that take the form of centering around a single character, faction, or planet. Warhammer 40,000 Rogue Trader, however, breaks that pattern entirely by adopting the structure of an isometric CCRPG. It accomplishes something that 40K media rarely achieves. It figuratively and literally gives players the key to their own void ship and tells them to go out and do the unthinkable, explore the grimdark future for themselves. Rather than merely placing you inside the armor of a space marine or in the role of a commander issuing orders to troops in a single war, Rogue Trader slows things down while also significantly broadening both the scope and scale. This change in direction allows players to experience the Imperium in a way that has never really been done before, and not simply as a playable faction, but as a setting to be explored. It gave players agency to interact with the multitude of factions and sub-factions that compose humanity's decaying empire and make decisions whose moral, political, and spiritual weight reflect the true complexity of this universe. It is, simply put, the first video game to make the player feel as though they truly lived within the 41st millennium, or whatever year it happens to be. And don't get me wrong, I get it. 40K, traditionally speaking, isn't a setting known for adventure and exploration, despite having such an extensive and well-documented universe. That kind of thing is something that's mostly reserved for the more obscure novels. This is the grimdark future we're talking about, the one characterized by endless war. Thus, most of its games are going to focus on action first and foremost, rather than exploration and complex RPG mechanics. But as many longtime 40K veterans know, those type of games paint a very incomplete picture of this setting. Warhammer isn't just a series of bloody vignettes, it's a living, breathing universe. If you're unfamiliar with it, the Rogue Trader pen and paper RPG, which served as the source material for this game, is one of the few Warhammer properties that truly spans the entirety of both the 40K power spectrum and its wide array of narrative themes. Choosing this material as the basis for a video game was, in my mind, a stroke of brilliance, and that's for two very important reasons. First, the pen and paper RPGs that were originally produced by Fantasy Flight Games are full of obscure lore that a large portion of the 40K fan base is not familiar with. I'll admit it myself, even though I'm somebody who's been reading 40K fiction for over 20 years, I didn't pick up any of these RPG books until 5 or 6 years ago, which was long after they had been discontinued. And when I started reading through them, I'm gonna be honest, something kinda weird happened that I've never experienced with any other piece of 40K fiction. I felt like a kid again. I felt like I was rediscovering this universe for the very first time, as there were so many interesting things on every single page that I had never heard of. And I'm somebody who literally reads Warhammer material every single day as a job, which is the most ridiculous thing ever, but that's a topic for a different day. The second reason is that the Rogue Traders themselves function unlike almost any other Imperial character or archetype that players could possibly take control of in a video game. They occupy one of the most unique and flexible positions in the entire Imperium, a sanctioned free agent who navigates the thin line between Imperial duty and personal ambition. In layman's terms, there's no better potential main character for a game where freedom, exploration, and moral compromise define every single decision. If you don't know much about the Rogue Traders and the lore behind them, I did make a deep dive into this subject a little while ago that I'll have linked down in the description if you want to check it out. In the meantime though, the abridged version is that you can think of them kind of like explorers and pioneers that have been granted something known as a warrant of trade, a sacred document signed by the Emperor himself over 10,000 years ago that basically says the Rogue Trader and their heirs are able to do whatever they want, so long as they can find a way to justify their actions as being in the best interest of the Imperium. Did you find an uncharted planet that you want to claim and colonize? Go for it. Do you want to establish a new trade route, even though that means entering into an alliance with some shady characters like pirates or even Xenos raiders? No problem. As a Rogue Trader, it's within your authority to operate as you see fit, Again, so long as you can justify it as being for the good of the Imperium. In addition to their freedom, these guys are absolutely loaded. They have so much wealth and power that it's literally impossible to calculate how much money they actually have. Their net worth is measured not in dollars, but in entire worlds. This is something that's illustrated so beautifully in the Rogue Trader game by the profit factor system, which admittedly can often confuse new players who are jumping into Rogue Trader for the first time, as most people are used to just exchanging gold for items in other RPGs. Basically, there isn't any real currency in this game. The more influence you gain and the more colonies you establish, the higher your profit factor goes. When interacting with a faction that you can potentially trade with, there are two numbers that are important, both your profit factor and your reputation level. So long as you have the required reputation and the required profit factor, everything that meets those numbers or below it, they'll basically just give you for free. I know it's kind of confusing, but this is supposed to represent them being like, hey dude, you're so unbelievably wealthy and influential that this is a measurement of all of the resources and sweet loot that we'll just give you for free to stay on your good side. I'll be honest, feeling like a baller in Warhammer 40k is not a feeling that I ever thought I would experience outside of the Bad Moon Orc clan, but I'm not complaining. And here's the thing, the Rogue Traders have so much influence that the whole thing about them having to justify their actions isn't always true. They can get away with some downright evil and heretical stuff. If that's the path they want to take, there isn't really anyone with the authority to tell them no or the resources to stand in their way. At least that's how it tends to operate until they piss off the wrong people or the Inquisition gets involved. So what I'm saying is, be careful if you're planning out a heretical playthrough. Their untethered freedom, their ability to move through every sphere of society, their influence that can shape the future of the galaxy itself, and the fact that they have the resources needed to fund any possible expedition makes the Rogue Traders uniquely suited as the best avatar through which a player can experience everything the 40k universe has to offer. And the best part about it is, just like how every Rogue Trader in-universe is uniquely different from one another, no two player characters will have the exact same experience, as the game's extensive character creator allows you to mix and match hundreds of different backgrounds, home planets, occupations, and unique histories to come up with a Rogue Trader all your own. Do you want your Rogue Trader to be a former naval commander who values honor, chivalry, and hierarchical structures over personal gain? Well, you can make that character. Do you want to be a zealous preacher who seeks to spread the light of the God Emperor to all the filthy heretics and unbelievers in the dark corners of the galaxy? What about a renegade psyker that's decided to use their warp-given powers and their newfound authority to become a tyrannical champion of the Chaos Gods? Both options are open to you. What about where your Rogue Trader hails from? Were they born in the void on an Imperial cruiser and have never known what it feels like to stand upon solid Earth? Are they a Death Worlder that grew up fighting giant snakes and Catachan devils just to get their next meal? Are they a tech-obsessed Forge Worlder whose every action is done in service to the Machine God and the Omnissiah? The Rogue Trader character creator is uncompromisingly extensive, with a ludicrous amount of options to choose from that not only enhance the role-playing experience, but also give some pretty impressive benefits. And the best part is that this is all lore accurate. Every single one of these characters, and a million more, could be the heir to a Rogue Trader dynasty. Meanwhile, over here in Space Marine games, your choices are limited to, do you want to be the red one or the blue one? Maybe one day we'll get a Space Marine game that allows us to be the green one, but I wouldn't hold your breath. Like, hear me out on this. I love Space Marines as much as the next guy, but there's only so many stories that you can tell with them as the main character. Today, they're going to be fighting Necrons on this planet, and the next, they're going to be fighting heretics on that one. It's a relatively narrow avenue in terms of storytelling. You're not going to see a Space Marine doing something like investigating a bunch of local disappearances in the back alleys of a hive slum, or negotiating a territory dispute with a low-level gang leader. Can you imagine a Space Marine trying to go undercover amongst a bunch of regular humans? It's like, dude, who are you trying to fool? You're 8 feet tall and built like a house made out of biceps. Your camo cloak's not fooling anyone. The storytelling potential of a Rogue Trader, by comparison, is seemingly infinite. They can walk shoulder to shoulder with the common folk in the alleyways of a hive city, while also commanding the loyalty of those in the highest positions of authority within the upper echelons of the Imperium. One day, they might find themselves smack dab in the middle of a barroom brawl after negotiations with a shady arms dealer go sideways. The next, they can be commanding multiple armies as they seek to conquer an entire planet. The Rogue Trader video game embraces scale in a way that no other 40k game has done before. It captures the staggering breadth of the Imperium by giving the players free rein to explore the Coronis expanse. Players adventure through warpstorm-ravaged sectors, plumb the depths of ancient Xenos ruins, establish their own colonies, and wrestle with Imperial bureaucracy. They're able to experience the loud and bombastic set pieces that 40K is famous for, while also taking time to focus on the lower end of the power scale with far more personal and intimate engagements. Whether that take the form of tracking down suspicious cult symbols in the back alleys of an Imperial space station, or exploring the haunted decks of a marooned Space Hulk, to name but a few. It's a meme within the 40K community that this is the only franchise in existence that the majority of its fans would not want to get isekai'd into. Reading about 40K and playing video games set in the grimdark future? Amazing. Actually living there? Unending nightmare beyond mortal comprehension. However, the rogue traders are potentially the only exception to that rule, as being born as one of them would actually be kinda sweet. At this point in the video, it should probably go without saying, but one of Rogue Trader's most impressive accomplishments is its unwavering respect for Warhammer's rich lore. The game's writing and world building display an encyclopedic understanding of 40K's millennia-spanning history, while avoiding the temptation to drown the player in exposition. It feels authentically grounded in the material that served as its inspiration. Righteous priests of the Imperial Creed speak with a fiery zealotry in condemnation of those who would stray from the Emperor's light, while the tech priests of the Adeptus Mechanicus we find in-game are far more monotonous and mechanical in their approach. Their voices are often heavily modulated in a way that is pleasing to the blessed machine god. Even simple interactions with common citizenry highlight the superstition and fear that permeate daily life within the Imperium. For a massive 40K fan like myself, it makes every conversation engaging and rewarding. Importantly, this fidelity never lapses into fan service. Whereas many adaptations rely on recognizable iconography, like cameos from fan-favorite Space Marine characters or references to the setting's most famous battles, Rogue Trader digs deeper into the universe's internal contradictions. It shows us the machinery of Imperial rule, the compromises required to maintain order, and the moral decay that lies beneath the Emperor's divine light. And oh, don't you worry, I got a lot to say about that one, but we'll touch on that a bit later in the video. This approach makes the world feel lived in and terrifyingly plausible. I'll admit that for someone who's not familiar with 40K, everything that Rogue Trader throws at you all at once might come off a little overwhelming. But if that's you and you ever get confused, or just want to dive a little bit deeper, the game also comes with an extensive encyclopedia full of information on just about every faction, character, or planet that you could want to know more about. The game will even highlight text and dialogues that you can hover over to learn more information when something important gets referenced. What I like about this system is the game never insults your intelligence, nor does it baby you and hold your hand, introducing you to each faction, element, or character one by one. It just throws you right into the deep end. Now, I can't speak to this one myself personally, as I know a lot about Warhammer, but with other games, I much prefer this. I don't need you to dump a whole bunch of exposition on me before the game even starts. Just let me go out and figure things out for myself. The authenticity that Rogue Trader manages to achieve at times feels like it's bordering on reverence. The art direction is absolutely amazing. The architecture in many of the Imperial locations draw heavily from the classic Baroque Gothic architecture we all know and love. I'm talking huge cathedrals of iron, sanctified machinery, and the tasteful combination of candles and skulls on pretty much every surface, even when it's completely impractical to do so. Likewise, the sound design layers choral hymns with the hum of servitors and the distant rumble of plasma reactors. It manages to merge religious and mechanical notes in a way that evokes a civilization that's simultaneously ancient and futuristic. Like, when you listen to these tracks, you can feel the weight of faith, decay, and tradition that has come to define the human experience in the 41st millennium. It's a unique flavor of cosmic despair that's so distinctly Warhammer. So yeah, Rogue Trader absolutely nails what 40K is supposed to look and sound like, while refusing to confine us to a single point of view or type of experience. In addition to its wide array of planets and locations, the game lets us explore something equally important: the spectrum of morality in the grimdark future. As I mentioned before, most other 40K games have a very specific story that they're trying to tell, and thus will often lock us into only one perspective. Their characters are also routinely fixed in their convictions, offering little room for genuine choice or moral interpretation. It makes sense for something like a third-person shooter or a real-time strategy game, But considering how complicated morals, ethics, and politics can be within the Imperium, it's an absolute crime that we've never really been given the opportunity to explore this in a meaningful way. Rogue Trader corrects this by giving us an in-depth alignment system that is so much more than just a good guy, bad guy slider. Throughout the game, the Rogue Trader will be presented with a wide variety of choices, many of them marked with one of three distinct alignments: dogmatic, heretical, and iconoclast. By selecting one of these options, they'll earn points that push their character further down one of these three paths, but they're totally free to mix it up and earn points in a combination of them. Does one situation call for a dogmatic approach, but in another you find yourself getting kinda spicy and you want to get a little bit heretical? No problem. It's worth noting though that you can only go to rank 3 and above in one alignment. The other ones you can only go up 2 ranks in. And hey, I'm not gonna judge. My first playthrough, I was definitely trying to follow the good guy path, but when certain pieces of a clearly evil sword kept showing up, I wasn't just gonna throw those away. Now, at first, the three alignments presented to us may simply appear as good, evil, and neutral options, but there's a lot more complexity going on here, and it demonstrates Owlcat's deep understanding of the source material. In our examination of morality in Rogue Trader, I think the best place to start is with the naming convention itself. It's not good, evil, and neutral. It's dogmatic, heretical, and iconoclast, 3 words with strong historic and religious connotations, which makes perfect sense in context, as despite what unique path each of our rogue traders will end up taking, we are all in essence starting out as a servant of the God Emperor and the Imperium, a deeply spiritual faction where the ecclesiarchy is one of the most powerful organizations that has ever existed, and veneration of the God Emperor is not considered optional. I will admit, the naming convention might be a little confusing for newcomers who are just getting their feet wet with 40k and want to do a good guy playthrough, which, statistically speaking, is most players, at least on their first run through in an RPG like this. I'd imagine in such a scenario, they would likely end up gravitating towards dogmatic, because heretical is clearly evil, and iconoclast, although it's a word not commonly thrown around in day-to-day life, is used to describe somebody who attacks cherished beliefs or sacred institutions, which doesn't really sound like something a noble hero would do. But let me tell you, that word, in context of 40k, perfectly describes this school of thought. But I'm getting ahead of myself. This hypothetical new player that goes down the dogmatic route will probably end up being pretty shocked to realize that a dogmatic playthrough will force them to make absolutely merciless decisions with bleak and often brutal outcomes. So I want to talk a little bit more about all 3 of these alignments, and I'll admit up front, I may be thinking way too hard about this, but for as simple as this system is, to me, it's one of the most important things that Owlcat got right about this setting. Okay, so how are the 3 alignments defined? What do individuals in each of these schools of thought believe? In the eyes of a dogmatic rogue trader, the lives of the Imperium citizens pale in importance to the Imperium itself. Its protection is paramount, even if it comes at the expense of individuals. They believe in the infallibility of the Imperium's laws and the holiness of the God Emperor. They that adhere to his principles are duty-bound to carry out his will to the ignorant and unruly masses. On the opposite end of the spectrum, we have the heretical path. Both dogmatic and heretical individuals have forsaken acts of compassion, mercy, and selflessness, but whereas the dogmatic path asks one to devote their actions to something greater than themselves, the heretic is motivated solely by their own self-interest. In their quest for power, they may take to worshipping malevolent forces and make unholy sacrifices to the dark gods. They will spread corruption in the taint of the warp and seek out forbidden lore in order to satiate their most sinister impulses. Ironically, it's actually the third path, the path of the iconoclast, that ends up being what I think most people would recognize as the de facto good guy path. However, it's important to remember that this isn't any old traditional fantasy or sci-fi setting we're talking about. This is the grimdark future of Warhammer 40k, where there is no peace amongst the stars, only an eternity of carnage and slaughter and the laughter of thirsting gods. So it might not be as morally correct as it appears at first glance, but I'm getting ahead of myself again. Okay, so what do the iconoclasts believe? Rogue traders that adhere to the iconoclast school of thought harbor a strong belief in humanity, in compassion, personal freedom, and the importance of an individual rather than the vast labyrinthian institutions of the Imperium. They seek out compromise and understanding even with those who might be considered foes, rather than engaging in the uncompromising destruction demanded by the Imperium's dogma. In the grimdark future, attributes such as compassion, mercy, empathy, and understanding have all but completely died out in the common man, for most are far too focused on merely surviving. It's in these rare individuals that the human spirit, a belief in the value of human life, clings tenaciously to existence amid the dark squalor of the 41st millennium. Iconoclast characters will routinely find themselves acting in a selfless manner, whether that take the form of defending the weak or interfering in a conflict that doesn't concern them in order to guide the affected parties towards a peaceful resolution. Those options almost always appear as the morally good choice to make in the moment, but are often condemned by both dogmatic and heretical NPCs and frequently have long-term consequences that vastly outweigh the short-term positive outcomes. For example, at one point early on in Act 1, the player will be faced with a strange scenario where something goes wrong with a large collection of their servitors down in the lower decks. If you're unfamiliar with servitors, they're best described as part helpful servant and part walking cyborg nightmare. Criminals that have been lobotomized, mechanized, and pumped full of preservatives and life-extending chemicals so that they can continue serving the Imperium for centuries or even millennia. Anyways, the servitors on your ship have been acting strange and may potentially become violent. After a brief investigation, it's revealed that a recent warp phenomena has affected them in a profound way. Their consciousness is no longer dormant. These people have regained their sentience. They remember who they are and are aware of their surroundings. However, they've woken up to an unthinkable nightmare, trapped in a body they can't control. When examined further, it's visible that they're trembling with fear. There are three options presented to us that have an alignment associated with them. The heretical option sees the rogue trader pull out a ritualistic dagger and sacrifice them. The dogmatic option has the rogue trader declare that this doesn't matter, they've still got a job to do, and you send them back to work. Finally, the iconoclast option has the rogue trader order they be decommissioned so that their souls may finally rest. Now, that was certainly a merciful thing to do, but now your workforce is severely diminished, and in essence, you've robbed yourself of a resource that could have been used to help you save lives in the future. In another instance, we have the character Idira, who is one of the earliest characters that we get to join the party. Over time, the dogmatic characters in our retinue will routinely warn the rogue trader that she's an unsanctioned psyker, a dangerous liability, and a witch that can't be trusted. The laws of the Imperium dictate that she must be executed for the sin of existence. The dogmatic rogue trader will agree with this assessment and either do the deed himself or have one of his party members carry it out. Yet, the iconoclast doesn't believe in this. She's proven herself as a trusted ally and can't help the fact that she was born with psychic abilities, so their request is denied. However, later on an incident occurs where she loses control and a whole lot of people end up getting killed. Their blood is now on the rogue trader's hand, and once again, the dogmatic party members insist that she be put down. The iconoclast refuses. This was an accident, not an act of malice. I don't want to spoil it, but I'll let you know right now, at the end of Act 1, there's a massive event that occurs where you'll be faced with a really difficult decision. I'll just say the more selfless you try to be, the more people that you try to save, the more consequences that you and your crew and the galaxy as a whole will end up suffering. But like I said, I don't want to spoil it. Based on all this, it might seem like picking the path of the iconoclast isn't necessarily a good guy playthrough at all. It seems like this school of thought is characterized by individuals who, although they mean well, are blissfully naive optimists, ignorant of the bleak reality of the grimdark future, which is certainly how the dogmatic characters in the game will react towards you when you make these choices. Now, here's the thing. Punishing you for trying to do the right thing, that's 100% on point for 40k. They don't call it the grimdark future for nothing. But just like the Imperium itself, it's not as black and white as all that. Quite often, the iconoclast choice, the one that seems like the obvious good guy path, where you display empathy for the downtrodden or ignore the Imperium's edicts to defend those it would deem impure, shockingly, doesn't actually come back to bite you. Sometimes it really does end up being the best possible decision, despite what the Imperium has hammered into the minds of its faithful servants. It's really like a 50-50 shot on a lot of these, and it's what makes this such a fantastic system. Not just in terms of replayability, but in capturing the essence of morality within the Imperium. Honestly, hats off to the developers for going the extra mile in this department, as it would have been so easy for them to have just implemented a traditional good-evil sliding scale, where the dogmatic choices are always framed as the best ones, with no pushback against the player's actions. But they didn't do that. The writers wanted to make sure that no matter what path you took, you never felt completely comfortable with your decisions, which again, 100% on brand for 40K. They threw you right into the deep end and forced you to confront both the unfortunate necessity of the Imperium's laws and the blatant hypocrisy of its warped view of purity. It doesn't attempt to moralize your choices, it simply gives them context. In the interest of time, I'm not going to do a full deep dive into the morality of the Imperium and the actions their servants are routinely instructed to carry out. That is a heavy topic that deserves its own video. But to aggressively oversimplify it, its faithful have no qualms with being perceived as the lesser evil on the galactic scale. Mankind's enemies are legion, their empire is besieged on all fronts. Those tasked with protecting the Imperium, particularly those in the highest positions of authority, are indoctrinated to devalue human life in order to protect it. There's an old inquisitorial saying that states to combat the monster, we in turn must be even more monstrous. From our perspective, it seems absolutely insane that one man would be gifted the power to destroy an entire planet, sending billions of innocent Imperial civilians to their deaths. Yet these individuals know the consequences of not unleashing a purifying Armageddon before it's too late. Excise the infected limb to save the body. By sacrificing one planet that has become corrupted, they in turn save dozens if not hundreds of worlds and untold trillions of lives in the future. The same is true on a smaller scale when it comes to executing a witch, forcing awakened servitors to carry on in their duty, or leaving poor unfortunate souls who were in the wrong place at the wrong time to their fate. From their perspective, the hardest choice you can make, the one that would see the ungrateful call you a monster, is the only morally right choice. And those who lack the strength to pull the trigger are traitors to humanity. In their eyes, idealists are dangerous heretics. Compassion is a sin, and weakness a crime punishable by death. It is an uncompromisingly brutal worldview for sure, but one that has held back the tides of darkness and kept humanity safe for thousands of years. There is truth in this, and it's how in the stories the Imperium routinely justifies its actions no matter how callous. But if you know anything about 40K and the Imperium, then you know that the Imperium is also the source of most of its own problems. As a society, it's a rotting, bloated carcass plagued by political infighting and corruption at every level of governance. It forces its civilians to live in squalor as a cog in the Imperial war machine with no value for human rights, thus actively creating the perfect condition for underground chaos cults to form, traditionally made up of people desperate to escape their chains of servitude. The Imperium's hatred of aliens has caused them to unleash genocide on a galactic scale, not only against their enemies, but thousands of peaceful species as well, and oftentimes against their own citizens. Their belief that the galaxy is humanity's birthright has caused them to expand their borders far beyond what they can reasonably control. Many of the worlds on the Imperium's fringes are not properly supplied, plagued by famine, and routinely fall prey to enemy forces. Within the Imperium, human life is viewed as a disposable resource. Many worlds are plagued by legalized slavery, and those within the Imperium's fighting forces are sent en masse to the meat grinder of war. This isn't to say that the Imperium isn't full of heroes and good people trying to do the right thing, as that's certainly the truth. But when we're looking at them on a macro perspective, dismissing their darker practices as simply a necessity with no further examination robs us of a great deal of nuance. Personally speaking, I absolutely love the Imperium. They're one of my favorite factions to read about in 40K. I love them because of how complex they are, how the line between grimdark necessity and callous abuse of power is constantly shifting and difficult to pin down. I genuinely love the duality of the Imperium as a beacon of righteousness that stands in defense of humanity while also existing as a cautionary tale against unchecked hubris and mankind's darkest tendencies taken to their most extremes. The uncomfortable blurring of these two realities is what makes the Imperium as a faction so much fun to read about, and as a setting in a video game, fascinating to explore. But unfortunately, as is often the case, this ridiculously interesting, complex moral structure is something that barely ever gets paid lip service to in most 40K games. I love Space Marine 2, don't get me wrong, but in terms of how the Space Marines are portrayed in that game specifically, it's glorified Imperial propaganda. Compared to older 40K lore, all of the Imperium's rough edges there were ground down and polished to a mirror finish. Now personally, I'm the type of guy who thinks that when people try to characterize the Imperium as unquestionably evil or irrefutably good, they're missing the forest for the trees, and it's why the morality system in Rogue Trader is so amazing. In one instance, it will make you rail against the laws of the Imperium, and in the next, it will leave you sympathetic to their edicts. It will both punish and reward your hubris, applaud and admonish your code of ethics, justify both your empathy and cruelty, and ultimately leave you with a much deeper understanding of what it's truly like to be a servant of the Imperium in the 41st millennium. If I had one criticism, it would be that this enormous amount of depth, it mostly just pertains to iconoclast and dogmatic playthroughs. The heretical path falls much more in line with a power fantasy where you get to be a cartoonishly evil mustache-twirling villain, which, I'll admit, is definitely fun and refreshing in its own way. I imagine that if this game had only 2 alignments, then all of the dialogue choices for Iconoclast would ironically end up over on the heretical side, which, if you're new to 40K, might not make a lot of sense, but in the lore of 40K, being nice to aliens? That's a heresy, my dude. But anyways, at the end of all this, those are just my thoughts. I absolutely adore this game, and I'm super excited to see where Owlcat takes it in the future. The first 2 expansion packs have been great so far and allowed us to explore some highly underrated factions, both the Imperial Death Cults and the Adeptus Arbites respectfully. But the next 2 are poised to be just as good. Like I said at the beginning of this video, I cannot tell you how excited I am to get into the one centered around the Processional of the Damned. That's one of my favorite creepy 40K mysteries, and I can't wait to see what they do with it. Like I said, I think Rogue Trader manages to capture the universe of 40K, both in terms of its scale and narrative themes, better than any game that's come before. And if you haven't played it yet, then definitely use my link in the description or the pinned comment and check it out for yourself. But what are your thoughts on all this? Have you played Rogue Trader yet? And if you have, what do you think of it? Is it your favorite 40K game, or does that honor belong to a different game? What's something you'd love to see added to Rogue Trader in a future patch or expansion? Likewise, what's a faction or character that you'd love to see represented in a Warhammer RPG? As always, let me know all of your thoughts, comments, questions, and concerns down in the comments section below. Big thanks to everyone who supports all the work that I do, and I will catch you all in the next one.